So welcome everybody to the May 19th session of the Association of Energy Engineers New York panel, New York chapter. This is our last session and our first session in a while for the 2020 season, and we all hope to see you virtually in September. This may be our new normal for a while, we'll see. Many of you are aware our June gala has been canceled. We are having a board meeting following this session, and so we may have another technical meeting on COVID, HVAC response, and so on. So keep your eyes open for that email. Our chapter award nominations are still open. Please send in anything that you'd like us to consider. We do have a July planning meeting of our board, and so please send us any suggestions for topics you'd like to see for next year's sessions. So all be safe and be well. I think we may have our scholarship is open as well. So just to begin the session now, thank you all members and sponsors, and especially our guest speakers, for joining our New York chapter of the Association of Energy Engineers for our panel discussion on the utility of the future. That's our catch-all phrase for the long-term trends impacting the utility industry. While any one of our panelists can talk for several hours on each of those topics, we only have 1 hour for them all. We've asked them to each speak for about 15 minutes. We hope to leave the last few minutes for questions. We'll get to as many as we can. You'll see on the screen on your right, your ability to send in a question via a text to me. I'm listed as send questions here. Jeremy will try to answer as many as we can. The presentations are all going to be uploaded to our website, so you can pay attention and not take so many notes. For those of you interested in receiving continuing education credits, you have to complete a questionnaire which will be sent toward the end of the presentation. There will not be any awards for people who leave before the end of the 1 hour meeting. So, okay, let's begin.
Jeremy, just point out that the way you will get that link to the questionnaire, if you want your PDHs, is to pay attention to that chat box, and the link for that will be there, and you'll have. So
pay attention to that chat box on the right. That's where the questions will appear. You have to answer those in order to receive your continuing education credits. Okay, now we'll get started. A range of evolving technologies, including flexible demand, electrification, distributed and renewable generation, energy storage, and advanced power electronics and control devices. It's all creating new options for the provision and consumption of electricity services and driving change. In many cases, these innovative resources are enabled by increasingly affordable and ubiquitous information and communications technologies, and by the growing digitalization of power systems. So what are the longer term trends in society, and especially in the energy industry, that are impacting the electric utility industry and the gas utility industry? We'll have speakers addressing both. From an increasingly dispersed generation mix, including offshore wind and greater renewable generation at our homes and businesses, greater communications enabling the true smart home and smart city, and the ability to better match generation and consumption. Add in trends like EVs, greater electrification on the grid, and we're already seeing the future of the electric utility industry. How has COVID-19 already highlighted some of those trends? How is demand already shifting by hour and by neighborhood? And what do our utilities and regulators see ahead for this summer? I'm not sure we'll get to all of that, but we hope to address as much as we can. So I'll introduce our speakers now, and then I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Steve Wemple. He's General Manager of Con Edison's Utility of the Future team, responsible for the energy policy issues associated with New York's Reforming the Energy Vision, or the REV proceeding. Prior to joining the Utility of the Future team, Mr. Wemple was Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, representing Con Ed's non-utility affiliates, Con Ed Development, Con Edison Energy, and Con Edison Solutions, in both state and federal regulatory proceedings. Mr. Wemple has been an active participant in the New York, New England, and PJM energy markets, and he is a prior chair of the New York ISO's Business Issues Committee. He's worked for Con Edison family of companies for over 30 years, with responsibilities ranging from resource planning for steam electric generation, the design and implementation of energy efficiency programs, development of retail access programs, as well as marketing and business development for the wholesale and retail commodity business. Mr. Wemple received his Bachelor of Science and Master of Engineering degrees from Cornell, and he's a volunteer fireman in his spare time. Raghu Sudhakara is currently Director of Demonstration Projects with Con Edison, where he's responsible for projects piloting new business models and company initiatives in transport electrification. His team is also responsible for driving regulatory policy outcomes and stakeholder positions related to energy efficiency and demand management. Previously, he was involved with the non-wires alternatives that developed portfolios of customer-side resources in order to defer or offset building traditional infrastructure. And before that, he advocated on behalf of the company on wholesale demand response and electricity market issues at both the NISO and PJM. Before joining Con Ed in 2012, Raghu worked as a consultant to power generation companies around the world on power plant efficiencies and power purchase agreements. He has a bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering and a dual master's in public administration. Our last speaker, Chris Kavanaugh, is a principal product manager at National Grid based in New York City, with 39 years experience in energy and is a licensed professional engineer. He's a graduate of Cooper Union and NYU Tandon and is a commissioner of the Bayshore Regional Sewerage Authority in New Jersey. So with that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you. Don't forget to ask your questions and we'll try to get to them. Thank you, everyone. Steve, it's all yours.
I pull up my slides. Thank you very much, Jeremy. It's an exciting time in the energy industry. We are definitely evolving from the reforming the energy vision to the exciting times of the clean energy goals. Just as a little background, reforming the energy vision was New York's first attempt to change the utility business model and try to animate more customer-sided resources to solve some of our distribution needs. In doing so, it brought a lot of clean resources into the mix, whether it was rooftop solar, energy storage, high penetrations of energy efficiency, as well as battery storage, fuel cells, combined heat and power. What we're seeing now in New York is building on that momentum from reforming the energy vision to a much more aggressive focus on clean climate initiatives, such as decarbonizing both the electric grid as well as other aspects of the New York economy, including transportation and heating. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit of the impacts of that, some of the challenges it will pose to Con Edison and National Grid as the utilities providing electricity and natural gas, as well as the challenges to some of the building owners and operators that are going to have to meet some of these new goals. And in particular, the implications for New York City and Long Island because of the constrained pockets that we're in. Then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Raghu, who's going to talk through some of the exciting ramp-ups that we're being challenged with and we're gearing up towards for both increased energy efficiency as well as some of the rollouts of heating for to convert oil and gas to cleaner electric sources, as well as some of the transportation initiatives we're facing. So hopefully most folks have heard of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. It is a very ambitious set of goals that looks for a 40% reduction in statewide emissions by 2030 and an 85% reduction by 2050. To put that into perspective, if we had 100% clean electric grid, we would come way short of that because the reductions, electricity comprises about 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. So we just can't squeeze that much carbon reductions out of electricity alone. We have to tackle transportation and home heating as well. But as we've seen through the REV process, one of the most cost-effective ways to reduce emissions is to actually reduce consumption in the first place. So Raghu's going to talk about the ramp up that we're seeing on the energy efficiency. But a big aspect of the CLCPA Act is the mandate to focus the benefits on some of the disadvantaged communities, to make sure that people in environmental justice areas that might have been exposed to higher levels of air pollution or are economically not able to invest as much as perhaps more affluent people can receive some of the benefits. That could be direct program funding. That can also be environmental benefits resulting from some of these programs. To put the goals into perspective, before CLCPA, we had a pretty ambitious renewable goal, getting to 50% renewables by 2030. To put it into perspective, we're about 27% now, dominated mostly by upstate large hydro. So even 50% was a pretty daunting goal. Now that the CLCPA has ramped it up to 70%, it's even a little more ambitious. And going further from that, by 2040, we will be we'll have zero emissions. I'm going to touch a little bit on what that means for New York City and Long Island, because we've historically been a generation or transmission constrained area where we need local generation to meet reliability needs. So what that really means is we need to find a way to deliver a lot more renewables into the New York City and Long Island area. Yes, we can continue to promote distributed storage, which does have a big ramp up, but that alone isn't going to get us where we need to go because there isn't enough space in New York City for the amount of renewables that we require. So we're going to have to look at new transmission to bring upstate renewables in, and we're going to have to look at offshore wind to bring it in. And even when we get to that level, we're going to have to invest as well in more flexible clean resources, whether it's clean energy storage to capture off-peak renewables and discharge it on peak when we need it most, or perhaps some clean natural gas alternatives, whether it's hydrogen or renewable natural gas coming into our system. So as I mentioned before, New York City and Long Island are traditional transmission constrained pockets that require local injections of electricity. As I mentioned, there's just not enough space to put solar panels on every roof and get to our goals, and nor is there the appetite for land-based wind within the New York City, Westchester, or Long Island area. So to displace and really back down the existing fossil units that are keeping the lights on, we need more renewable resources injected right into the downstate area. That probably is going to require a build out of some transmission infrastructure to build new interconnection points for the offshore wind that's being planned. We currently have NYSERDA contracting for about 1,800 megawatts of offshore wind, half of it coming into the Gowanus switching station in Con Ed's territory, the other half going out to Long Island. But because we're a very dense urban area, there aren't a lot of open substation positions for extra wind. So there's going to have to be a build out to accommodate that and help the state to get to those goals. The recent budget bill just passed a mandate to do a lot of studies as to what are the transmission needs to help with the CLCPA, and the commission last week initiated a proceeding to at least look at some of the local transmission and distribution needs that are going to be necessary. The other aspect we're going to need to invest in is energy storage, whether it's at customer locations or on the bulk system to balance some of the intermittent generation. And we're also going to need some flexibility in the dispatch, in the distributed resources, whether it's curtailing some of the renewables or having dispatchable load like electric vehicles, be aware of the price signals and be responsive to that. One of the big initiatives is energy storage. Con Edison has a pending solicitation for 300 megawatts of energy storage connected either at the primary feeders at typically 13 kV or higher, or at the transmission feeders. We have a couple of projects that we're in contract negotiations for. We're hoping to make an announcement, if not later this month, early next month, about who the winning projects are. And we think that's going to be a big step forward. We've already been working a lot in the non-wire space to build portfolios of customer-sited resources that do include energy storage, but we're not going to get up to the 3,000 megawatt state goal a couple of megawatts at a time. That just, it doesn't scale. And while it helps with distribution relief, it's not as cost effective as building larger utility scale projects. There will be a continued value for customer-sided storage, both to help reduce peak usage and reduce the demand charges that Con Edison's notorious for. So it's a great way to control costs and reduce your consumption coincident with the distribution system peak, and help basically free up some delivery capability for other customers. That will be supported both by the natural price signals from rates as well as some NYSERDA incentives. Finally, storage can help create microgrids to increase customer resilience. One of the other big challenges is offshore wind. As I said before, 9,000 megawatts is a pretty significant goal, and we're going to be looking at a process through the PSC initiated proceeding from last week to basically identify the transmission necessary to bring some of this into the New York City area. It's a great opportunity, if we can get it right, to make sure that all of that wind comes in and is used and useful by customers in New York City. If we get it wrong, we'll either not get to the 9,000 megawatt goal, or we'll have to constrain and curtail some of that potential wind generation because we just won't have it coming into the right parts of our system. And that would be a disappointment. So we think Con Edison can play a key role in helping guide the state into the right spots to interconnect some of that wind, to help make sure it's delivered to customers, to help reduce carbon emissions and provide for the ability to electrify some of the non-electric technologies, whether it's transportation or home heating. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Raghu.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody. I think Steve gave a really good overview of some of the big policy actions that's taking place in New York State. And really, I'll focus on two very specific examples. And even before I go into the examples, I'll just note that there's at least two major strategies that the state is using to accomplish some of these very ambitious greenhouse gas emission goals. First is what right-size the load, and that's really where energy efficiency comes in. So you're actually reducing consumption, reducing demand as much as possible. And second is to electrify certain fossil fuel intents like end uses such as heating as well as transport. And so one has an effect of reducing electricity consumption and the other has the effect of increasing electricity consumption. But the thought there is that that electrification is still beneficial because as we green the grid with increasing amounts of renewable generation, that is the electricity that will supply those electrification end uses. So focusing first on energy efficiency, Steve already mentioned the very ambitious 185 trillion BTU goal. And to just put energy efficiency in perspective, that energy efficiency is expected to contribute 1/3 to the 40% reduction goal by 2030. This particular line here is pre-CLCPA, so it would only be, we expect it will only be more ambitious after the CLCPA implementation plan is in effect. 31 of those TBTUs are energy efficiency savings to be delivered by utilities. And just on an electric perspective, the goal for the state is really at 3% of annual sales, equivalent reductions every year achieved by 2025. That's actually shared between the utilities as well as NYSERDA. Some of the major themes in the state's energy efficiency policy goals, one of them would be fuel neutral. So really now it's both electric and gas. And really that's the reason you're seeing the metrics in BTUs. Previously, we'd look at decatherms for gas and megawatt hours for electric, but now it's BTUs and it's a lifetime basis. So it's not really looking at what you're getting in the first year, but what you're getting over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Second theme is really cost effectiveness. So as we have to deliver more and more energy efficiency, how do we do it in a way where there's lots of benefits to customers, as well as at as low a cost as possible. Third really is most of the energy efficiency in the state has been focused on lighting, which is, if you will, the low-hanging fruit in energy efficiency to move to LED lighting, etc. But really the focus going forward is to go into the deeper energy efficiency measures such as HVAC, building envelopes, window replacements, etc. And lastly, heating electrification, which really is heat pumps, both to replace oil or gas that's being consumed in the state today or in Con Edison service area for heating, as well as a significant increase in focus on low and moderate income communities. As we even talk about the state goals, there's the New York City goals as well under the title, if you will, of the Climate Mobilization Act. And there's like an alphabet soup of local laws from local law 97, 92, 94, 95, 96, etc., all focused on emissions. Suffice to say that the goals in the city is just as ambitious, with significant limits expected for at least larger buildings above 25,000 square feet in 2024 and 2030. So moving to the next slide, which would be slide 8, a little more about energy efficiency. So you could see the trajectory of energy efficiency in the Con Edison area that started in 2017. So prior to that, Con Edison, if you see the left side, which is electric energy efficiency, was at very low levels, and and then if you see the blue bars, shows the achievements that we've been able to ramp up in the last 3 years through 2019, and that started with the state's increased emphasis on energy efficiency in around the period around 2016, 2017, which is the beginning of Con Ed's last rate period. So, but the red line that you see is really the targets, and you could see that the growth rate is expected to continue, which are the targets, the minimum targets, over the next 3-year period and through 2025 as part of the new efficiency New York proceeding. On the right-hand side, you could see gas energy efficiency, which has been at about 0.2% of sales prior to 2017. Increased emphasis here starting somewhere in the 2017-2018 period. And then we expect a similar level of increased focus and growth through 2022 in this chart, and then further through 2025 as adopted by the state's new efficiency New York proceeding. Put together, we're looking at 10.5 million MMBTUs in electric and 6 million MMBTUs in gas through 2025. One quick note, there's also a very significant heat pump related goal that's now, even though it's electrification, it's part of the electric energy efficiency in the state's policy construct. And we're looking at a 1 million MMBTU target for Con Edison alone through 2025. Moving on to the next slide, shifting focus from energy efficiency now to electric vehicles. Again, we are in the middle of an electric vehicle proceeding. The proceeding focuses primarily right now on light duty vehicles. We expect to then move to medium duty and heavy duty vehicles next. And if you see the scale of ambition that New York is looking at, it's sort of illustrated in the two charts. The chart on the left, you could see today there's somewhere under 50,000 EVs penetration in New York State. State's goal is 850,000 by 2025. And if you see it as a percentage of light duty vehicle fleet, from 0.5%, we're looking at going to over 8.5%, close to 9% share of the fleet. The gap between what this policy goal is and what is expected under I'll call it the business as usual scenario, is sort of illustrated on the right. So if you take a look at the dark blue line at the bottom, that represents what the OEMs, the auto manufacturers, expect the EV sales to be through 2025. And then you could see what the EV share is expected under the state's goals and the light blue line on the top. So to get to this, to close this gap, there's going to have to be a lot of new investment, and the first step in that investment is building out major infrastructure to support the light duty vehicle penetration that the state is looking to achieve. So in view of this, in the current proceeding, Con Ed did put in a proposal to get to 36,000 level 2 chargers, which is a slow charging in the state by 2025, and over 900 DC fast charging stations by 2025, which represents a very aggressive growth target. So if we go to the next slide, we'll just, even though it's an ongoing proceeding, we'll just talk about the 4 key principles we used in the program that we proposed in the state. Essentially, how do we get the infrastructure in place using market, third-party actors in the market to get to these charger levels. And we feel Con Ed's like well placed to connect people with the buildings and the land and the parking garages with the EV charger developers. We do want to accomplish the program as cost effectively as possible. We do want to look at specific needs in our service territory, such as paid parking and on-street parking that a lot of Con Edison's customers in the downstate region rely on, and then to also develop a program that's simple and easy to understand, it's creative, and that can actually move the process fast, because we have some lessons here that we've learned from other states that have established these kinds of EV programs previously, such as California. Moving on to my final slide, just want to again illustrate the nature of growth that we're looking at here in electric vehicles. If you see the different companies' growth on the left, you'll see Con Ed seems to be somewhere in the middle of the pack in terms of the growth rate to 100% of the goal by 2025. However, if you see at the bottom, you'll see the scale of the plugs or the EV charger plugs that we are actually looking to achieve, which is substantially higher than even other states such as California. So I guess the second biggest one under here is the PG&E EV program, which is in San Francisco, looking at 7,500 plugs versus the Con Edison goal, which is 37,000 plugs by 2025, assuming the commission adopts these targets as final. On the right, it just sort of gives you an illustration of the growth trajectory that this would take. We're really looking at unprecedented levels of growth in EV charging under this scenario, which is a 200% plus annual growth rate or compound annual growth rate. So with that, I'll stop so I could give Chris time for presenting his view, as well as to leave some time for questions.
All right, should I begin then?
Yes, please.
All right, and we will share the screen right here. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you. Can everyone see the cover slide? Very good, thank you. So thank you all for having me today. It's great to be there, even under such strange circumstances, to give you an idea of what National Grid is up to out throughout the Northeast. You know, we can see the names here. I can see some familiar names on the attendee list. So thank you all for coming from different parts of my life over many years. So anyway, so this is I'm Chris Kavanaugh with the Utility of the Future group at National Grid. We're really focusing on the 3 states we're in, but are also a little heavy on gas here because we are the gas company, of course, in New York State. And I'll go to the next slide. And there we go. This is what I'll cover. It looks long, but actually it's actually fairly brief. Just kind of organizing what I'll go through. We repeat what Con Edison did an excellent job on the CLCPA in the New York City version, sort of our version of that, and sort of some of the technologies. This is this technology group that can kind of put some of these things together. And then some of the objectives moving forward and some of the partnerships we think are essential to making that happen. The obligatory who we are slide, National Grid, we're electric and gas in the United States, 3 states, upstate and downstate New York, most of Rhode Island, and different parts of Massachusetts with gas in Boston and electricity in Worcester, for example. And in the UK, of course, we are now the transmission company for the gas and electric systems. And we're essentially the ISO for electricity in the UK and run the Scottish networks as well. Okay, so I won't go too much into this, but this is a chart that describes sort of the objectives of the for New York and basically where we've gone. I mean, we're showing a 20% reduction, and as was pointed out before, we're looking for 80 or 100% reduction. So despite all the great progress, long way to go. But it does break this out. It just is a good chart. It does break out what the elements of the progress, so such as electricity, heating, transportation, so forth, where we were in 2017, and what the gap is to be made up. So I won't go through this all, but it's in terms of GHG emissions, an formidable task that I think all of us on this call will be looking at. Again, I won't read this. This is the our summary of the New York State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, signed by the governor in 2019, with incremental steps ratcheting down to ultimately zero electrical GHG from electric emissions by, actually, can't see it. Oh, by this at 2040, right? Yep, 2040. And this includes ground source heat pumps as a renewable, which is a good thing, something we're interested in. And there are some alternative compliance mechanisms that are being considered as well. Thing that we're disappointed about, we will be working on, that some waste to energy and biofuels are not considered. And our discussions with some of the environmental groups are supportive of including some of those. So we'll be looking to get those back in there. This is some of the details. There is obviously a benchmarking effort, and there will be some protections for low income. I think as was mentioned before, also by Condon. And this is the real goal: 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, 6 gigawatts of solar PV by 2025, and 3 gigawatts of energy storage. All right. New York City, not to be outdone, Mayor de Blasio, has got his agenda as well. Very similar types of objectives, but maybe a little bit more down on the granular level, particularly more on the building side. I think it was mentioned before, some of the energy grading that's going to be going on, which is supposed to get started now, which I think may probably be slightly delayed. There'll be financing, and there'll be emissions limits on buildings that are enforced, and penalties, which is never something that's fun, particularly not too popular with the real estate industry, from what we hear. Our pathway on this is really very similar. We developed our own strategy. We have a white paper on this. It's a little bit eclipsed by things by the CLCPA, but we've had an 80 by 50 policy for a few years now, and we really broke it into 3 big objectives, right? One is accelerating zero carbon electricity, which was obviously one of the goals. There needs to be a 67% percent penetration of zero carbon electricity. There needs to be transformation of the transport sector, which means 10 million vehicles in the Northeast roads. Roughly half of all the vehicles. Think about it, half of the vehicles should be electric. I have an electric car. I never thought I would do that, but I did. And then transfer to the heat sector by doubling the rate of energy efficiency retrofits and converting away from oil heat to electric heat pumps, and still in some cases natural gas. Moving forward, that's and obviously we were a part of the first offshore wind project in the United States, Block Island, that is connected to our system in Rhode Island on December 12th, our electric system. So, but heating is the tough one. I think I kind of did a great job before mentioning that heating is the tough one. And this is what we've seen as the objective. Number one always is energy efficiency. We've got to maximize, and we will be ramping up the energy efficiency programs, which are quite large already, which I'll talk about. But we also want to look at biomass, hydrogen, power to gas, basically hydrogen as an energy storage technique, geothermal heat pumps and resources associated in the shared loops and the infrastructure required for that. Airside heat pumps have a role, and hybrid heat pumps as well. So these are some of the basic technologies we're looking at. But some late breaking news, which I did change this presentation from the draft. I'm sure a lot of you will be interested, so rather than just wait for a question, I just put it in there. The gas supply situation that obviously we've struggled with at our company and really throughout the downstate area. This is our latest supplemental report, shows the new gas trends and the impact of the virus, which is very interesting. There is certainly a dip for that, but there is still a need for new capacity. But it is official. If you haven't heard, it's in the news. The Northeast Supply Enhancement Project is formally dead. It is withdrawn. It is canceled. So that is the end of that. I think to no one's surprise that that came out last Friday. So it's pretty hot information. So we are pushing a report, and I put a a link at the bottom of all the different options we've developed. The one that seems to be getting a lot of, I think we seems to be one of the more probable or potential solutions is to do some expansion of some of the existing infrastructure we have, particularly at our LNG plant down in Greenpoint in Brooklyn. And that's a good chunk of it, maybe half of the demand, but the rest of it is going to involve people like you. Because what we're going to need is incremental energy efficiency and demand response, which means we could look at something like in addition to what's currently planned, an additional up to 300,000 buildings in the downstate region will need to be weatherized by 2035, and up to 45,000 heat pumps. And this is a tough area, as we all know, for implementing heat pumps. But there'll be incentives, there'll be programs, and there'll be ways to promote this. So, and that'll be by 2028. So that's what's going on with that. We still continue, of course. Number one on our side of the meter or the system is the leak-prone pipe replacements. We are trying to find ways to dramatically. This is a graph that shows the population of pipe by type, and we are still making significant investments in replacing and upgrading that pipe so as to dramatically reduce the small leaks, the large numbers of small leaks that contribute to climate change. But in the future, we're also looking at possibly sharing some of this infrastructure in the rights of way with shared loop geothermal or green hydrogen. So we'll talk a little bit more about hydrogen in a few minutes. On the transportation side, kind of did a great job explaining, I think, and quantifying the challenges that we have there. Obviously, we're doing the same thing, looking at electric vehicles. We've built many charging stations at the low side on the low volume charging, the level 1 and now level 2, and we have large proposals for level 3, of course. Alliance to Save Energy did an excellent policy piece on this and did some work. I highly recommend taking a look at that report. But we're also looking at hydrogen vehicles, the Toyota Mirai and so forth. And that paper really calls for innovation. It calls for our research, development, demonstration, and deployment. It talks about more investment in vehicles as well as infrastructure. This makes jobs and so forth, which I think is something that's going to get a lot of interest going forward. Okay, zero emission transportation. I mean, the kind of modes we're talking about, passenger cars, so forth, public transportation, on campus, off-road vehicles. New York State's the New York PSC's current case on this is listed there, and this is the objectives. A lot of DC, big increase in DC fast charging, and that's going to put some strains on the distribution system, and our distribution system, particularly upstate. That's going to need investment, and was mentioned before too, vehicle to grid technology, where the vehicle can be a source and a user, and a storage medium. We're looking at infrastructure, could explore. We're talking about possible using utility poles and street lighting and so forth for HVAC charging, overnight charging, terminals, micro-mobility, electric bikes, and this sort of thing. Electric vehicle options, and there's still a lot of federal tax incentives both for electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, which do qualify as a zero emissions vehicle. So that's probably enough on that. So the holistic energy system, something we've talked about, something's been talked about in Europe and Japan. One system working together, and this really tries to combine transportation, which is and terrestrial uses, which hasn't been done before, with renewables and of both the fuel side and the biogas, as well as the electric side, the wind and solar that we're currently expanding. So here's some of the elements of that. As I said before, first, energy efficiency. This is a good chart. It describes from a programmatic standpoint just that the amount of money that's being spent by, again, companies such as yours in the Northeast. We're in hundreds of millions of dollars through the states that we work in. Northeast is clearly the leader, except for California. Those budgets are large and they are increasing. I think Massachusetts is still number one in terms of the scaling up of their systems. We also mentioned very good mentioned before of the energy storage challenge. So infrastructure it's hard to build infrastructure now, whether it's electric or gas or anything else. So we need more storage to be able to also deal with intermittency and also deal with the distributed nature of a lot of the resources that we'll be getting. So we're looking to find ways to expand energy infrastructure through the addition of storage, and that's both on the utility side of the meter, as well as up on the poles, as well as in houses. We're going to have every size possible, from handheld up again to very large utility scale. So that's our facility in Nantucket Island on the top there. But there's also thermal energy storage. Thermal energy storage is a way also to try to manage peaks on the gas system. Our objectives are going to be safe, clean, and reliable. And if you don't mind the Star Trek reference, no red matter, so to speak. And of course, it'll support the development of microgrids. The energy storage proceeding, I won't get into this, but these are the targets for New York State. 1,500 megawatts of energy storage by 2025, 28 to 3,600 by 2030, and they define what they consider a qualified energy storage system. Kind of segue into hydrogen. If we took our 21,000 miles of pipeline and we put in blended gas at 15 psi, we could store 24,000 grams of hydrogen, renewably produced, right? Demand response is a big thing too as well. We always talk about demand response from the electric side. Again, companies such as yours, I think we'll be talking in the future to your customers about using demand control on the gas side as well. This is just the results of one of our demonstration projects. The heavy line is a pressure trace at just a random spot on the system near someone who participated in the program. And obviously you can see compared, that's with having a demand response event called, and the other trace is on a cold day or without it. So you can see obviously it flattens it out. There's a lot of value to doing this, and this will all be done through remote control. Obviously, the old legacy programs like temperature control and all that, we still need those. We're not going away. But this is something to be a little more customer-centric. Renewable heating, renewable natural gas, anaerobic digestion, thermal gasification, wood waste, obviously the landfills and we call wastewater. Solar thermal is getting a little bit of a comeback. It's something that's usually been treated as an energy efficiency measure. And has not done particularly well in the benefit cost analysis, but some of the analyses are starting to look a little up, possibly because of some new technologies are pretty promising. Big one for us, of course, now is geothermal, the ground source heat pumps. Shared that we've done a demonstration in Riverhead, New York, with 10 manufactured homes. Our actual measured COP was rated in heating was greater than 4.6. So we really can't beat that. Thanks to NYSERDA for sponsoring the monitoring of that program. And we have 10 retired folks who are pretty happy with it. We're also going to be, in our next break case, including a demonstration of carbon capture at the household level. There's a couple of devices out there, one called Cleano2. It'll take up to 60% of the CO2 out of gas, and it'll produce actually a marketable product which can be used to make soaps, potassium hydroxide. So that's sticky there. Newtown Creek was mentioned before, I think. This is a project that is about to start up now. It is built by AEE for us. This takes basically the output of the Newtown Creek, New York City's largest wastewater treatment plant, and produces enough heat for 2,500 homes. I also included in this slide in the top right, if you notice, this is a brand new resource assessment of all the different sources for RNG in the country, and what their potential is going forward by year. Obviously, those that involve wet waste and anaerobic digestion are the relatively easier ones. Thermogasification is higher. The drier wastes are a little harder and more expensive, but clearly there's a potential there. For the last 10 years, we've been saying it's about a 20% potential of the entire residential gas heating load. Now it looks like it's north of 40% or even higher in some places. Okay. And some of those would actually, with very low or even negative greenhouse gas factor, carbon intensities, using the California guidelines for that. You also may be aware, and I'm almost done here, but you also may be aware that we've come up with the first ever standard interconnection guideline in the United States for RNG. There is a standard and a process that has been developed, and we are implementing that right now. So for anyone who wants to bring a digester or a gasifier and interconnect to our system, the process and the support exists to do that. Real quick on hydrogen. Again, we are talking, there are different ways to make hydrogen. We've done all of them, but really we're talking about green hydrogen. So that's renewable electricity, electrolysis, and an injected system, and this is the full cycle efficiency for that. This graph shows basically compares hydrogen and different technologies for energy storage, and power to gas and power to gas methane, and then using hydrogen methanation to make synthetic gas is among one of the more effective in terms of both size and scalability, as well as discharge time. So we see hydrogen as a natural extension of utility service, both the electric side and the gas side. I won't go and read these, but these are the definitions and how they, in public service law, and how they fit. And both of them, of course, support electric vehicle transportation. One little comparison for all you for us energy geeks. There's the amount of energy in that little dot there that can be stored by a Tesla Megapack. There's the big circle is how much renewable electricity could be stored in our Long Island gas network as hydrogen. All right, blending is going on in large numbers in Europe. Right, so this is our former affiliate Cadent and our own company in the UK is running several projects, and one called High Deploy. We are piloting at Keele University up to 20% volume of hydrogen blend, and this is live now. And there have been some changes to appliances, and there have been some changes to pipelines, and they're testing how far they can take that right now. A lot of research going on. There's a new group coming together with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to look at blending. There's a demo already in place. It's SoCal Gas, GTI, the Gas Technology Institute has a brand new organization created to look at hydrogen. The New York Gas Group has which is part of now NYSERC has got a part of the Northeast Gas Association, has got a blending research program. And of course, transportation, the Air Liquide and Toyota program, as I mentioned, the Alliance to Save Energy Forum. Big thing to think about in going forward is also communications networks, switching a little bit. Utilities are building AMI systems. So there's a lot of demand now for new applications, not just to read meters, but to do remote controls and this kind of thing. Also to look at things like additional applications, residential methane detectors that are connected. Things like Schenectady is adding a bunch of different things to this light pole system we have, including gunshot detectors in the downtown area. So it's kind of interesting. All right, and that's basically it. We see a really important role going forward for academia. They can bring basic and long-term research. They have academic relationships. It's for this reason we founded this new Innovation Institute for Gas Innovation Technology at Stony Brook University. And they've already created a number of programs and won some awards from NYSERDA again, which we're very thankful for that. Other interesting thing, which is kind of exciting, and I think this is my last slide, is the incubator community, the startup community. There are a lot of programs out there sponsored by universities, sponsored by NYSERDA. They call them proof of concept centers, and these folks are young and interesting and have some very interesting ideas and very aggressive ideas, and they're trying to get little businesses going. This is the New York version. It's Clean Tech Northeast. There's also in Massachusetts thing called the Greentown Labs, which we support. PowerBridge, I think, is currently on hold, but I think they've done a tremendous amount of work with the universities in the downstate area. And that is it. I think I kept it basically on time.
That's great. Thank you all very much. We've received a number of questions, and I've sent some of them to the speakers that I thought were most appropriate to answer them. So, Steve, you got the first couple, so if you want to start off, your choice.
Sure. And I'm trying to see, I see there's group chat. Did you send them to me individually, or do you want to read them off, Jeremy?
Sure, hold on a second. I had one that actually is for the group while I'm looking for the ones I sent to you. There was one said, since we're relying so much on wind power, what has been the record of wind power during hurricanes? And, you know, hurricanes in the Atlantic could be different than hurricanes in the North Sea.
Well, North Sea certainly gets high winds, as does the Atlantic. The interesting thing about wind turbines, whether they're land-based or offshore, is there's a certain low threshold below which they don't produce any power, although with the longer turbine blades, they're getting better and better at starting to generate at lower wind speeds. But there's also an upper wind speed where basically to keep the equipment safe, they'll rotate the blade so it's no longer pitched to capture the wind, it's almost parallel to the wind to protect the equipment. So basically there's a threshold, and I forget whether it's 60 or 70 miles an hour, but when you get to a hurricane force winds, they'll consciously take the wind turbines out of service, which creates an additional intermittency that you don't want the porridge too hot or too cold, because you won't get any electricity out of it. You need to just be in a workable mid-range band.
Thank you. Raghu, I had sent you a couple of questions as well. Did you see them?
I had the same issue as Steve. I
Okay.
can only see the group chat here.
Okay. Well, we had another question about there's so much reliance on storage, and yet there is still some significant restrictions on fire codes and so on, especially in New York City. While either one of you could answer that, Steve is the fireman.
I have great respect for New York City FDNY, and clearly there are exterior places in industrial neighborhoods or areas zoned for manufacturing that storage makes sense and can be deployed. We have, and you're really referring to lithium ion that has the fire concerns, because we've been looking at lead acid installations in buildings for a long period of time for UPS systems or for peak clipping, but the more agile lithium batteries do have fire concerns, and to the best of my knowledge in New York City they've only been done exterior with reasonable spacing from structures, all for good valid reasons, because APS had unfortunately a runaway explosion. They didn't kill anybody, but they hurt some first responders who were trying to investigate what was happening there. The good news is FDNY had put in a lot more monitoring and protection that was not in that desert-sited battery that had issues. So I think we're ahead of the curve thanks to the cautiousness of our local fire department.
But the bottom line is that the early installations will all be outdoor locations until some technologies approved for indoor use.
Correct. Within lithium, unless you're staying with
Yes.
lead acid. Yes.
Right. Yes, Verizon has lots of lead acid. They're very happy sitting in our basements. NISO estimates that the CLCPA compliance will increase Zone J winter peak by about 300% by 2050. What is Con Ed's plan to provide that additional capacity?
So I think that is based on the entire heating load being picked up by air source heat pumps without any supplemental heating. And what I like to say, the 2050 goals are ambitious. We actually arguably don't have the technology right now to get there. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be making headway towards those goals. And if you focus more on the 2030 goals, there is the technology out there to get there. So we'll either need improvements on heat pumps, or we'll need a hybrid application where maybe the heat pumps are base loaded and something else provides that real cold weather peaking heat, which could be some of the things that you heard Chris talk about, which could be renewable natural gas, hydrogen gas, or carbon offsets if we actually still burn some natural gas but offset the carbon in some other way. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to understand what those longer term goals mean, but it likely means we will become a winter peaking utility and a winter peaking state, and may have more infrastructure needs depending on how much that winter load grows.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question,
Okay.
Darrell.
I'm just looking to see. Let's see. For Chris, there isn't and won't be sufficient supply of biogas to replace more than about 25% of existing natural gas supply for downstate New York. Given that biogas is a limited resource, it should be reserved for electricity generation while furnaces and boilers are replaced by electrically powered heat pumps. Would you comment on
Yes, I
that?
believe that's Bob Wyman, my old friend Bob Wyman, who I know well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Yes. Well, I have a lot of respect for Bob, and he's been a good voice for the geothermal community, and applaud a lot of what he's accomplished. So the answer to that is, well, that's not what we. I don't think we agree with the premise. So, the new AGF study is looking at something greater than 40% is the possibility. So it's a fair question. Okay, so if you can only do 40%, I think it's more, but let's say you can only do 40%. What about the other 60? So the other 60, we've never said that RNG is going to be everything. It shouldn't even be 100%. But what we would do then is energy efficiency is going to drive it down. There is absolutely a role for renewable heating, but there is also a role for hydrogen. This is why we need hydrogen. So the idea is can we decarbonize? The fundamental question I think the Bob was asking, which is the absolute right question, is with RNG, can we decarbonize the gas system? And the answer is not alone, but in concert with other things, we absolutely can get to zero carbon in the gas system, with the right investments and the right technologies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
So this is for everyone who wants continuing education credits, PDH hours. You should all see a link in the Zoom group chat box. You'll see a link to a Survey Monkey. That quiz will be open until 4:30 today. So please answer those questions. We'll have your email address and we'll make sure you get your credits. Let's see, we have time for one or two more questions. Any breakthroughs on electrolyzing water to extract hydrogen instead of extracting from natural gas?
Well, yeah, so I can answer that. I was just at a conference in Scotland on this. So right now, the typical electrolyzer, the catalytic electrolyzers, like the PEM electrolyzers, are probably, if we're lucky, 65%. But they were designed for a different purpose. So when you look at the different types, there's new research is going on to what are more effective electrolyzers. And I've seen some 90, 94, 95% efficiency on the conversion of hydrogen from electricity. So the short answer is yeah.
Very good. A number of folks have asked if the presentation will be available. We are recording it. The presentations that you viewed will be available on our website. We will find out if through YouTube or something, through the National Association of Energy Engineers, if this recording can be made available to people, and we'll let you know. Let's see, we have 2 minutes left. Could the case be made for overall carbon reduction for local waste to energy, putting electricity back into our local grids?
Well, we've had incineration for many years, right? And incineration, I think, is problematic. I think it's harder to get permission to build an incinerator than it is now in a nuclear power plant. So that's probably would be a challenge. But Massachusetts, for example, a state we serve, has a policy that bans incineration but encourages innovation in gasification. So the answer is yeah. They're doing it now. And there's an outfit called Harvest Power, and there's a few other small developers doing exactly that.
Very good. 1 minute left. Couple of folks asked for a little more discussion on carbon capture devices and applications. Can you address that for a second?
Yeah, so I showed that one Clean02 device. We're going to be, hopefully, we're petitioning to demo that. That's a device that will, in a small building, maybe not a small residence, but a medium, large residence or light commercial, will take the flue gases and it's the, what's that? I forget the carbolic acid, I think, reaction. I forget the name of the reaction, but anyway, it basically extracts carbon dioxide from the flue gases in the form of a liquid, which is then sold and converted to potash, and that's sold for use in green soaps. So that's a technology. We want to see how reliable it is, how cost effective that can be, and generate some heat. That actually, the reaction generates a little bit of heat, which can be recovered. So we're thinking maybe it'll get an EE incentive. I'm not sure it'll meet the BCA, but we'll give it a try.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we are out of time. Everybody, this was a great panel. I'm amazed it went off without a hitch. Thank you all very, very much. I hope the rest of your spring and summer goes as